I didn't know that the truth about humanity's origin would be buried beneath the ice, not in bones or artifacts, but in the body of the one who lived before us. We were studying permafrost layers, a routine geological mission meant to trace ancient climate cycles. I was the field engineer, responsible for drilling and scanning. Emily Carter, our climatologist, handled atmospheric readings and data calibration. Our base stood alone in the middle of a frozen plain that had no horizon, just endless white and the hollow sound of wind sliding over metal. Everything went according to schedule until the 12th day. That morning, my ground radar picked up an anomaly, a dense, perfectly symmetrical shape, buried 60 meters below the surface. It wasn't rock, it wasn't ice compression. It had clear, human-like contours. I drilled deeper. The bit struck something solid, smooth, glassy, almost polished. When I cleared the frost away, I saw it. A body. At first, I thought it was human. The proportions seemed right. Head, arms, torso. But as I shone my lamp over the ice, something caught the light. Metallic filaments beneath the skin. And behind the shoulders, two folded structures, massive and elegant. Wings. The feathers shimmered under the beam, silver and translucent, like frost spun into thread. He didn't look dead. He looked paused, frozen, mid-breath, mid-thought. Emily and I recorded the coordinates, took photographs, and agreed not to report it yet. We knew what would happen if the Institute found out. The body would vanish into a classified vault, and we'd never know the truth. That night, I couldn't sleep. The station was silent, yet the ground seemed to hum. Not crack or shift, but vibrate. A low, rhythmic pulse echoed through the ice, too even to be natural. I turned off the generator. The hum remained, faint but steady, like something enormous exhaling far below. The next morning, the sight had changed. The upper layer of ice had thinned, turning clearer overnight, even though the temperature had dropped. Through the transparency, I could see the details, the lines of the face, the curve of the ribs, the texture of the feathers. It wasn't imagination. Something in that frozen space was changing. Symbols began to appear on the inner walls. Not carvings, but darkened veins of ice forming perfect spirals and circles. Some looked like solar orbits, others like runes. They weren't random fractures. They were intentional. I knelt beside the formation and began brushing away the frost with a small steel blade, clearing each layer slowly. As the face emerged, I realized the skin was intact, smooth, unbroken, faintly luminescent under the ice. The hair was pale, the mouth slightly parted. It didn't look ancient. It looked recent. Emily brought over a floodlight. The light bounced across the surface, turning the ice into a mirror. For a moment, I saw three reflections: mine, hers, and his, lying between us like a line dividing the living from the still. We continued the excavation carefully, measuring pressure and temperature every few centimeters. It was standard work, but it didn't feel like science anymore. It felt like intrusion. Sometimes as I looked through the clear ice, I could swear the position of the hands had shifted. I told myself it was refraction, optical distortion, fatigue. But each time I returned, something felt different, as if the ice itself was aware of us. Then, when the floodlight flickered and went out, the darkness lasted only a second. But in that second, I saw it, the faintest glint of light inside the frozen eyes. Not a reflection, a pulse. And I knew then, the excavation had only just begun. We didn't wait for authorization. We just wanted to see what he was. The following morning, I contacted Dr. Raymond Hall at the main station. He was a biologist, experienced with cryogenic specimens, and one of the few people we trusted. Within hours, he arrived by snowmobile, exhausted and silent, carrying equipment for controlled thawing. The temperature that day was -43, yet the air around the drill site felt different, heavy, charged, almost electric. We cleared the upper crust layer with heated air and infrared cutters. Beneath the final slab, the body lay in perfect stillness, as if suspended between life and extinction. The wings were pressed tightly to the back, their edges fused to the ice. Feathers, if they were feathers, had a thin crystalline texture, like frost grown from metal. When Raymond measured internal readings, his monitor displayed something impossible. The core temperature of the body was warmer than the surrounding ice, by nearly 10 degrees. Emily suggested that residual heat might be geological, trapped from below. But the scanners disagreed. The warmth was centered on the chest. We debated what to do next, but there was no real question. Curiosity won over caution. Raymond set up a low-intensity thermal grid to loosen the ice without melting it completely. The hum of the generator filled the air. Slowly, the first crack formed around the figure's outline, a circle expanding like the eye of a storm. The air that escaped smelled of minerals and iron. It was old, impossibly old, and yet strangely clean, as if sealed from time. When we lifted the first layer of ice away, a wave of pressure passed through the chamber. Every monitor flickered. My pulse jumped. He was right there, only a few centimeters from the open air. The skin wasn't pale anymore. It had color, faint but visible, like something returning to circulation. Raymond placed sensors along the ribs. The readings twitched, tiny fluctuations. Biological, not mechanical. The chest rose slightly, then fell. For a moment, I thought it was wind from the vents, but there was no wind. It was breath. We all froze. Emily dropped her notebook. The sound echoed like a gunshot through the steel walls. The figure didn't move again for several minutes. Raymond's hand shook as he checked the vitals, though there was no heartbeat, no traditional rhythm. The readings came in pulses, irregular, layered, almost patterned, like a code. We continued carefully, freeing the lower part of the body. The legs were lean, muscular, covered with a fine layer of frost that refused to melt. When I touched the surface of the ice with a gloved hand, I felt a vibration, faint, rhythmic, like a living pulse transferring through the barrier. By late evening, the chamber around the excavation site had turned foggy from condensation. Every metallic surface dripped. The temperature sensors began to fail one by one, short-circuited by moisture. And then, without warning, the generator shut down. For a moment, everything went dark. In that silence, I heard a sound I'll never forget. A deep, strained exhale. Not mechanical, not wind, alive. I turned my headlamp toward the figure. A hairline fracture ran down the ice near the face, splitting across the mouth. The lips were slightly parted. Inside the crack, a thin mist drifted out. Cold air, escaping as if released from lungs that hadn't moved in millennia. Emily whispered something, but I couldn't make out the words. Raymond just stared. None of us spoke again. We covered the site, powered the generator manually, and sat there until dawn. The air in the room felt heavier with every passing hour, like the pressure inside a sealed vessel. When the first light broke through the clouds, I returned to the excavation chamber. The ice had sunk several millimeters overnight, forming a shallow depression where the chest had been. He wasn't breathing anymore. But the pattern on the frost, those faint spirals and symbols we'd seen before, had spread further across the walls, glowing slightly in the morning light. It looked less like a reaction to heat, and more like a response to being seen. We thought we'd found a fossil. We woke a survivor. He spoke before dawn, not in words, not in any language we recognized, but in sounds that seemed to shape themselves inside the air. His lips moved slowly, and the room filled with a deep, resonant vibration that made the glass instruments tremble. Emily recorded the sounds, running them through phonetic filters, and what emerged wasn't random. There were repeating syllables, rhythmic and measured. One of them matched an entry in an old linguistic archive, a fragment of Proto-Indo-European. The word meant cold. Another, home. We began to understand. His voice wasn't human in tone. It carried a strange weight, as if sound itself was being pulled through the ice. Raymond believed the resonance had physical properties, that his speech was producing low-frequency magnetic fields. The compasses in our packs kept spinning. The entire station's network flickered each time he spoke. Through partial translation, we learned fragments of a story. His kind lived long before recorded time, during the age the glaciers still owned the world. They weren't myths, and they weren't angels. They were a species, adapted to the cold. Their bones were hollow to reduce heat. Their blood carried crystalline minerals that allowed oxygen to circulate in freezing air. They lived in silence, in white valleys, where sound itself seemed to freeze. But the most striking detail came when he described their food. They fed on a single species of animal that no longer exists, creatures they called sarin, small, furred herbivores that lived in the snowfields and carried what he called the breath of frost. Their blood was dense with cooling agents, and without it, his kind could not survive. They couldn't digest warmth. Every living thing beyond the frost poisoned them. As the world began to warm, the sarin vanished. His people followed. He said they traveled north, chasing the cold, trying to find the last remnants of the frozen world that gave them life. Some believed they could sleep through the change, enter a state of suspension, waiting for the cold to return. He was one of them. Emily sat beside him for hours, writing translations by hand. The words came slowly, fragmented, through gestures and sketches. His eyes followed every motion she made. When she showed him photographs of modern animals, he recoiled, weakly, as though even the image of warmth caused pain. He tried to explain that the world was not kind to permanence, that every living thing had its season, that when the air grows too warm for one species, another rises to take its place. The realization settled like a shadow between us. He wasn't just describing his past, he was describing our future. Raymond dismissed it as symbolic. But as the hours passed, the temperature in the room dropped far below the external readings. The frost returned, crawling up the walls, freezing the condensation that had melted the day before. His presence seemed to bring the cold back, as if the environment itself remembered him. When he spoke again, his tone changed. No longer explanation, but grief. He said he had watched the last of his kind die, starving among the melting ice, unable to breathe in the new air. He had gone into the deep caves to sleep, to wait for silence. He expected to die there. Then, faintly, he spoke another phrase that Emily translated with trembling hands. "The world made you after it killed us." We sat in silence. Even the instruments stopped ticking. In that moment, I realized he wasn't telling a legend. He was reciting a memory, and it wasn't ancient. Not to him. It was yesterday. Outside, the wind had stopped. The entire plain was still. Inside the chamber, frost began to form again, slowly, steadily, covering his wings like a veil. We thought we were uncovering the past. But the past was staring directly back at us. After the third night, we moved him to the old meteorological cabin north of the excavation site. The main station had begun to fail. The temperature fluctuations were too severe, and the electrical hum from his presence disrupted nearly every system. The smaller cabin was safer, insulated, and easier to conceal. We kept the generator running only in short bursts. Heat made him weak. Every degree above freezing seemed to drain what little strength he had left. Emily covered the windows with reflective foil to block the sunlight. while Raymond set up improvised cooling systems. Tanks of liquid nitrogen vented through narrow pipes along the walls. Inside the frost-lit room, he lay motionless on a canvas cot. His breathing was slow, deliberate, each exhale visible in the air. The feathers along his shoulders shimmered faintly with ice crystals, as if drawing power from the cold itself. Raymond conducted blood tests from a small frozen sample we had taken before the move. The results defied biology. His blood was thick, metallic, filled with crystalline fragments that behaved like microstructures, tiny hexagonal lattices that refracted light even under the microscope. When exposed to warmth, they began to collapse, turning the entire sample into a dark, inert residue. "He dies in heat," Raymond wrote in his field log. "He lives through cold." We fed him melted snow water through a thin tube. It stayed frozen longer when he drank, as though the temperature around him refused to rise. Emily noticed he reacted to sound, faintly, almost imperceptibly. When she spoke softly, the muscles in his neck tensed, responding not to the words, but to the vibration of her voice. During the fourth night, the cabin thermometer dropped to -50. The air shimmered, and frost bloomed across the metal beams. Yet he seemed calm, eyes half open, expression still, wings slowly spreading, as if feeling the cold return. That same night, the instruments began to malfunction. The magnetic sensors flickered, showing bursts of interference from beneath the ground. It was as if something below was waking up with him. Emily asked me to record everything. She said this wasn't a discovery, it was a warning. She had translated one more phrase from his earlier words. It wasn't just about extinction. It was about memory. The earth remembers those it buries. Each time I repeated the phrase aloud, the frost on the walls thickened. By the end of the week, we noticed small lesions forming on his skin, patches where the outer layer cracked from dehydration. Raymond tried warming the air slightly, just 2 degrees. Within minutes, his pulse dropped to nearly 0. The lesions sealed again only when we brought the temperature back down. He was dying in our world, and yet he never looked afraid. When Emily placed her gloved hand near his chest, his eyes opened. Not wide, just enough for a thin line of silver light to reflect from within. His lips moved. We didn't understand the words then. Not exactly. But later, reviewing the audio, Emily translated the phrase. I waited for the cold to return. It was the first sentence he had spoken in full. The next day, the air pressure around the cabin shifted. A dense silence, heavy enough to make our ears ache. Outside, the wind had died completely. The sky was flat, colorless, motionless. Something was changing. It felt as if the presence of one forgotten life had disturbed everything that had come after it, like pulling the wrong thread in a web too vast to see. We didn't know it then, but the cold we had brought back into this place was no longer just a temperature. It was a signal. We thought we were protecting him. In truth, we were only delaying what was already coming. Raymond had grown distant. He stopped sleeping, stopped writing reports. He spent hours standing by the window, staring toward the dark horizon where the radio tower blinked once every 10 seconds. I knew that look, guilt mixed with temptation. He had sent a signal, a message. Someone was coming. The next evening, we saw headlights in the distance, faint, moving slowly across the snow. 5, maybe 6 figures on foot, flashlights cutting through the fog. We had no time. Emily packed the journals and the data drives, while I carried what little equipment we could save. The winged man lay still on the cot, his eyes half open, breath shallow and cold as smoke. We couldn't leave him behind. We wrapped him in thermal foil and carried him outside. The air was sharp enough to tear skin. Behind us, the crunch of footsteps grew louder, methodical, coordinated. Raymond's voice echoed, shouting our names. He wasn't pleading, he was furious. We entered the forest. The snow absorbed all sound except our breathing. The cold was absolute, the kind that silences thought. Emily stumbled more than once under the weight of her pack. I could barely see through the fog of my own breath. The winged man was lighter than he looked, yet each step with him felt heavier than the last. Then came the first sound, a scraping beneath the snow. Not footsteps, not wind, something sliding. The ground pulsed once, and a ripple of movement passed through the white surface like a wave. Emily stopped. The snow at her feet began to shift. A shape emerged, translucent, serpentine, made of ice and light. Dozens followed, twisting, silent, gliding between the trees. Their bodies reflected the faint blue of the frozen moonlight. They weren't animals. They were something older. A reaction, a defense, as if the earth itself had sent them to erase what didn't belong. We ran. The snow collapsed beneath us. The world turned into blur and sound. The hiss of frozen air and the cracking of trees as the serpents moved closer. Behind us, I heard shouting. Raymond and the others had reached the forest's edge. Their flashlights swung wildly in the darkness. The serpents turned toward them. Light vanished. The forest screamed. When the echo faded, only the wind remained. The winged man had fallen to his knees. His wings, half unfolded, glowed faintly from within, scattering frost like dust. He looked at Emily, not in fear, but recognition. Then he stepped forward, toward the advancing swarm. The serpents stopped. The air froze solid, suspended in stillness. He raised his hands, his eyes burning with cold light, and spoke one final phrase. A sound that split the silence like glass breaking underwater. For a heartbeat, everything froze. The air, the trees, even the serpents themselves. And then it all collapsed in on itself. A storm of white shards and blinding light. When I could see again, he was gone. The snow was covered in feathers. Emily knelt beside me, shaking, her breath crystallizing in the air. The serpents had vanished, not melted, not scattered, simply erased, leaving only faint trails of frost burned into the ground. We stayed there until dawn, unable to move, surrounded by silence so deep it felt alive. By sunrise, the forest looked untouched. No tracks, no wreckage, no blood. Only the cold remained, sharp, endless, waiting. We buried what little was left, a single feather, brittle as glass, and left the place without speaking. I remember turning back once, at the edge of the valley. The air shimmered where the cabin had been, a faint distortion in the light, as if the world itself was trying to forget what it had seen. He was gone, but the silence he left behind didn't fade. It spread. We walked for days without speaking. The forest had swallowed every sound of the storm, and the world felt emptied, stripped clean. The air still shimmered faintly, as if the memory of what happened refused to leave. Emily walked ahead, her pace mechanical, her breath shallow. She hadn't said a word since the light consumed the valley. Each time I looked back, I expected to see movement behind us, a shadow, a trace of the serpents, but there was nothing. Only the snow. At night, when we camped under the broken trees, I heard it again, the faint sliding noise beneath the ground. Not near us, but moving somewhere far below, tracing our path. It never came close, only followed, like the echo of something that couldn't die. By the fourth day, our water filters froze solid. We melted snow in metal cups over a small burner, rationed what food we had left. Emily's hands had turned pale, her nails cracked. When I offered her my gloves, she didn't react. Her eyes were empty, fixed on something only she could see. I tried to write, to document everything, but the words didn't make sense anymore. The pages froze as I filled them. The ink split and feathered like ice veins. At some point I stopped trying. The weather shifted again on the 5th night. The wind returned, carrying with it the faint smell of ozone, a scent I'd learned to fear. It meant static. It meant the cold was alive again. I woke to a sound like soft thunder rolling beneath the snow. When I looked toward the tree line, the ground shimmered faintly, forming lines that twisted and crossed, serpentine trails glowing under the frost. They were following us, steady, patient. Emily finally spoke. Her voice was thin, almost detached. She said they weren't hunting us. They were maintaining balance, that the world was simply correcting what we had broken. We walked until my legs gave out. Somewhere near the ridge, the forest thinned, and through the haze of snow, I saw the dark outline of a road, abandoned, half buried in ice. We followed it until we reached a rusted pipeline and the remains of a research cabin. Inside was a broken radio, a half-empty fuel drum, and warmth, faint but real. We stayed there for 3 days. The serpents didn't follow us past the ridge. It was as if the world itself drew a line they couldn't cross. When a supply convoy finally found us, they said they'd been tracking our emergency beacon for weeks. But that was impossible. We'd never activated it. The signal had started broadcasting the night after the storm. Raymond's name was on the manifest of the team that came to retrieve us. His file had already been marked deceased. Back at the station, I resigned. I couldn't explain what happened, and no one wanted to listen anyway. The official report described it as a localized subsurface collapse during a polar electrical event. The site was sealed, and no one was permitted to return. I left the Arctic soon after. I moved south, as far from the snow as I could afford. I bought a small apartment near the equator, a place where winter doesn't exist. I keep the air conditioning off even on the hottest days. I need to feel the heat. I need to believe the cold can't reach me. But sometimes, at night, when the air outside cools and the city falls silent, I hear it again. A low hum beneath the floor, the same rhythm I heard through the ice. The sound of something alive, waiting. I know the cold isn't gone. It doesn't vanish. It hides. It retreats. It remembers. And every time the temperature drops, even for a moment, I wonder if somewhere out there, beneath another layer of ice, something else is waking. Because if the world once replaced them with us, it can do it again. And next time, it won't wait for us to dig first. 2 months passed before they found me. I was living alone by then, in a rented apartment surrounded by heat and silence. The air outside was heavy with dust, and the walls hummed from the constant vibration of cooling systems. I rarely left the building. I told myself it was peace, but it was fear. I couldn't bear the sound of wind anymore. Every whisper of cold air made my hands tremble. The day they came, it was still dark outside. A quiet knock, then the sound of shoes on tile. No uniforms, no names. Just 2 people in black coats who said my name as if they had been practicing it for months. They didn't threaten me, didn't explain. They simply said there were questions I could answer. I remember the ride, windows blacked out, the hum of the engine steady and low. When we stopped, I felt the air change, filtered, sterile, colder than I'd felt since the Arctic. They took me through a corridor of white glass and metal. The air smelled of antiseptic and something faintly electric. On the wall ahead of me was a silver insignia, a circle intersected by 3 lines, engraved above a single phrase, "Foreign memory." They led me into a room with no corners, only curved surfaces that seemed to absorb sound. A table, 2 chairs, a single camera embedded in the wall. Across from me sat a woman in a gray suit. Her voice was calm, deliberate, the kind used by people who already know the answers to their questions. She asked about the Arctic station, about the anomaly, the recordings, the deaths. I told her what I remembered, but my words sounded hollow, stripped of meaning. She didn't interrupt, didn't react, just wrote. Then she asked the only question that mattered. "Do you claim to have encountered a non-human life form?" I nodded. "What did it tell you?" I hesitated. How could I explain it? That he hadn't warned us, hadn't threatened us, hadn't cursed the living? That he had simply described the order of things, the quiet mechanism of the world that creates and replaces? "He said we were made after them," I answered. "He said we were designed for the warmth that killed his kind." The woman's pen stopped. For the first time, she looked up. Her eyes were pale, expressionless. "Do you understand what that means?" she asked. I told her I did. That the earth doesn't create endlessly. It edits. It replaces. When one form stops fitting, it makes another. She closed the folder. On its cover was a code, stamped in red. "Archive entry. Extinct Type 1. Successor validated." She stood, thanked me, and left the room. I waited, listening to the faint hum of the walls. Through the mirrored glass, I could feel someone watching. Maybe her, maybe others. Maybe something else entirely. After a while, the lights dimmed, and a voice came through the intercom. Not hers, not mechanical. Something older, deeper, almost human. It asked a single question. "Do you still hear the cold?" I didn't answer. But as I sat there, I realized the temperature in the room had begun to fall. Condensation gathered on the table. My breath became visible again. The sound returned. That low vibration from beneath the ice, echoing inside the walls. It wasn't memory. It wasn't guilt. It was recognition. The lights flickered once. The hum deepened. Steady, rhythmic, alive. I understood then what he had meant. We weren't the end of anything. We were only the next attempt. Another species made to fit the moment. Another form that would one day be replaced. The cycle hadn't stopped. It had simply moved forward. When the door finally opened, I stood up, my hands shaking, the air sharp and freezing. And as I stepped into the corridor, I whispered what he told me beneath the ice, the only truth that ever mattered. The world never forgets what it buries.